Hello and welcome to Tennessee Informer. Tonight we're going to tackle two subjects that may sound completely different, but I think you're going to discover there's a common thread running through both of these issues that we'll cover tonight. Flock cameras are popping up everywhere, but in some places people are taking it upon themselves to tear them down. Citizens across Tennessee are making it known they don't approve of flocks, which is mostly because, I suspect anyway, that they don't trust government at any level and they fear how they could be used in a future surveillance state. While they can be used to solve crimes and find missing people, including children, many people just don't trust the government, even local government, with that technology, or they fear some government of the future would abuse that technology. It begs the question, when does public safety become mass surveillance? Speaking of trust in government, there are words that seem to be mutually exclusive today for many legitimate reasons. With our country so divided on many issues and with both parties failing everyone where their legitimate powers are concerned, how can we stay together as a country long term? Well, maybe if we followed the founders' design for a change, we wouldn't be near as divided as we are. In fact, I believe that is the only way to keep the federal government in check and restore the power back to the states that the founders intended. Make America States Again, which is true federalism, is a project of the John Birch Society. Two subjects tonight, one underlying question: who should hold the power? We're going to discuss flock cameras and federalism with the newly appointed John Birch Society Director for Tennessee and Georgia, Nathan Darnell. But first, it's time for the Informer Report. Ranchers have a beef with President Trump. So he's going to allow, I think, 300,000 metric tons of foreign beef in and not have to pay the tariff that he recently set on this. Now, I'm not sure what country this is from. I'd heard Argentina. I know in the past, I think the last time he did this a few months back was to help and support beef out of Argentina. I thought he was our president. I didn't realize he was co-president of Argentina. But, this is another one of those short-sighted moves. He's talking about the high price of beef, and this is to kind of help the consumers a little bit, reduce the cost of beef for the people. But while he's doing that, it's damaging the cattle industry, especially small ranchers. And of course, this is all driven by the midterms because, there's less beef in America now than there has been, I want to say, since the 1980s. And they've had a lot of different things happen to them. They've had droughts. They had the screwworm issue down in Mexico, crossing over into Texas. And so, it's a hard profession anyway. It's a hard life anyway. But, I don't understand why our president would temporarily lift a tariff to allow more foreign beef in. But he says it's to lower prices for the consumers. I just don't quite understand it. I think probably most of the cost, the high cost of living that all consumers are dealing with, has more to do with all of the spending, all the inflationary spending, all the money printing, big, beautiful bills throughout the decades, because we've had a lot of big, beautiful bills throughout the years, whether we called them that or not. It's more the spending than it is anything. The spending, the deficit spending, the borrowing, we're broke. We're broke. Yet we keep spending. And that has more to do with the high price of everything than, whatever amount we're talking here on the beef. It's funny too, he told everybody to, hey, look, I don't regret my decision to go into Iran, so it's worth you paying a little more in gas, paying a little more for your gas. But apparently it's not worth you paying a little more for beef to help our beef industry at a time when they're already struggling. So I think this is, you don't want one guy. This is why you don't want one guy, no matter who that one guy is, being able to call shots like this. Tariffs and lifting tariffs and suspending, that's not something that our country was set up for one guy to decide. Matter of fact, the Constitution is pretty clear that's the power of Congress, not the power of a president, which is why we're paying back a lot of those tariffs that he's collected over the last couple of years. So that's just one more thing there. 40 trillion in debt, 1.5 trillion interest on the debt, and then Secretary of Treasury Besant's latest actions. Basically, we're going to buy back some of our own debt. And I tell you, this stuff makes my head hurt. I don't claim to thoroughly understand all of it, but we're going to buy back our debt, which I do understand this. That's going to further reduce the dollar's value. That I do know, which makes it harder for those consumers that we're supposedly importing the foreign beef for. Can't figure that one out. In Tennessee, the Blackburn team, as in Marsha Blackburn, is already targeting independent candidate David Hatley for the arrest that he had when he was 21 years old. You know, they're already making hay out of an arrest. The guy's 50, 51. He had an arrest when he was 21. It was not a violent crime. Is the would-be queen being rejected by many in her own party? You know, read all about Hadley for yourself. The guy is definitely a self-made man. You can go to hadleyforgovernor.com. Now, I'm not at this point endorsing Hadley. I'll tell you right now, I'm not voting for Marsha. I'm not voting for the other commie, Jerry Green. And I would discourage anybody from ever considering voting for a Democrat. Democrats today are communist. Bottom line, they're communist or they're seriously misinformed. I think Green's probably a communist. All the same, I'm not going to vote for Marsha or the commie. I'm going to look and figure out which independent, and it may very well be Hadley. And I would encourage you to take a look. I'll tell you what, if we end up with Marsha in there, I don't think we'll ever get rid of the rhinos that are lined up behind her. I think we would be in a bad way for years to come. And having a commie like Green in there is not a good thing either. So hopefully we can find a decent independent. I'd love to see Marsha get beat. I'd love to see our state spared a Blackburn administration. That's it for the Informer Report. If you have a story you want to share with us, please email us at tninformer.tv@gmail.com. We'll be right back with our guest, Nathan Darnell, right after a word from our sponsor, LifeWave. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Light, the energy of life itself. Since the beginning of time, light has sustained us, fueled our growth, and shaped the world. Even Einstein recognized that everything we are is made of light. But what if we could harness the light within us, not just to live, but to renew, restore, and rejuvenate? Introducing LifeWave X39, the first product in the world that activates stem cells using our body's own light. Backed by clinical research, multiple patents, and over 10 years of stem cell research, a revolutionary wearable light technology that unlocks the power of activating our own stem cells with a single, safe, affordable, non-transdermal patch that puts you back in control of how you look, feel, and perform. Unlike drugs or chemicals, X39 works naturally, awakening your body's ability to heal and thrive. It's time to unlock your full potential, restore your vitality, and embrace a healthier, more vibrant you.
Welcome back, and now to our guest, the new director of the John Birch Society for Tennessee and Georgia, Nathan Darnell. Thank you for being with us. How are you doing tonight?
Doing great. Thank you so much for having me on your program, David. Really appreciate all that you're doing to help equip the folks in the Southeast about how to expand the Patriot cause.
Oh, well, thank you. And you've got your hands full too. So you took this job in April. Tell us a little bit about yourself and how you ended up working for the John Birch Society.
Absolutely. Thank you again for having me on your program. It's an honor to be here. I guess the most important thing I should tell you about myself is that I'm a sinner saved by the grace of God to faith in the Lord Jesus Christ and his finished work on the cross. I'm also the husband of one wife. My bride is Abigail. She served as the Georgia Right to Life vice president for 6 years. We were a very pro-life family. We just had our fourth daughter 2 weeks ago. She was born. We've had four daughters in 6 years. So we're not just pro-life, we are prolific. People ask me what kind of work I do, and we basically tell them that we run a nonprofit to feed hungry children. But it's an honor to be on your program. I love working with the John Birch Society to promote the wonderful ideals that they represent and have represented since 1958. Before that, I'm a law school grad. I graduated from Oak Brook College of Law back in 2008. I've worked at the state capitol in Atlanta as a legislative aide. I've worked for several different nonprofit organizations as well, off and on. But I've been active in the Georgia Republican Party, been elected to several different positions. I'm on the state committee with the Georgia Republican Party. I'm the treasurer for the 14th District GOP. And I was elected now twice as president of the Georgia Republican Assembly, which Ronald Reagan called the conscience of the Republican Party. And through that interaction, got to know the folks at the John Birch Society again. And we really enjoyed working with them because they are a principled group. They're a group that believes in promoting objective principles, specifically the principles of the Constitution, not just promoting politicians. We believe in the Republican Assembly and in doing something very similar. We have scorecards. We're excited about the scorecards that JBS offers. If you haven't seen those scorecards, you can go to freedomindex.com and you can find out, how your local Tennessee state rep or your local congressman is voting in terms of comparison to the constitutional principles. That's what really matters. And a lot of other organizations that I've worked with over the years or ran into over the years are trying to protect the politicians by making them look good, even when it's not true, even when they're not in conformity with Republican principles or constitutional principles, and actually try to get people to go to sleep. If they start to feel disturbed about something a politician is doing, they'll sound the alarm, and then these controlled opposition groups will say, oh, no, just go back to sleep. They're good. We're watching out for you. And they create scorecards that don't really reflect constitutional principles. They reflect what the establishment, those in power, want to accomplish and whether people are conforming to their agenda. Right. So it's very refreshing to be involved with groups like the John Birch Society. And
I think the fact that their basis is the Constitution means more than those other. You got Heritage and some of these other groups, but like you said, they get manipulated. I think with JBS, it's a truer evaluation of their loyalty and compliance with the Constitution. So I'm glad you guys do that.
Absolutely.
The realization that communism is still a very real threat in America and that the Democrat Party is full of them, it's become obvious to more and more people. But communism and communists in America, they're not a new threat. Your organization, the John Birch Society, saw that threat and sounded the alarm decades ago, and they were labeled conspiracy theorists and accused of wearing tinfoil hats for doing so. Let's talk just a few minutes about that, because you guys were like way ahead of the curve.
Yeah. We started back in 1958. I still meet folks who are, baby boomers that are in their retirement years, and they say, oh, I remember when I was a kid, I used to go with my parents to John Birch Society meetings. They were really big back in the 60s and 70s and the 80s. And we managed to thwart a lot of the aggressive advances of statism and totalitarianism in various ways over the years. We've done that through our magazines. We have the Freedom Index. We have the New American Magazine. We have a ton of books that are helpful in educating folks. We're not a partisan organization. We're a nonpartisan organization, but we do tend to draw conservatives to our organization more than others because our ideals, the constitutional principles, are more in sync with those types of ideas. Yeah, you can learn more about us at jbs.org. But yeah, you're right. We have been smeared, and that's true with any group that's actually over target. You'll find that the enemy often will try to smear them. I think it was Winston Churchill that said, "You're known by your enemies," and so the JBS definitely underwent some smears. I think one of the funny smears, the ironic smears, is they called us a pro-communist organization, which is just hilarious because we're like the most non-communist organization. Like you said, we started sounding the alarm in the Cold War back in 1958. When Senator Joe McCarthy was being harassed for his calling out the communists that had infiltrated government and Hollywood, and he was getting battered. In the military, there's a lot of evidence that came to light even after his whole episode that proved that a lot of what he was saying was right. But at the time, he was being, He was losing his credibility through the attacks that he was undergoing, and we defended him. And we later came to realize through some of the opposition we were getting was that the communists were really just kind of a front group for something bigger. The globalist conspiracy was using the communists, and they've used, the Islamists, and they've used other groups to essentially try to steal away our national sovereignty. We've propped up the communists over the years. They really would not have been as much of a threat as they became because we propped them up. We propped them up at the end of World War II. We left a lot of our armaments behind for the Chinese communists to take over China with.
And
we helped the Russians.
We didn't support the nationalists after that. We abandoned them. And of course, we abandoned at the end of World War II. I mean, we really helped the Russians during World War II, and prior to us getting involved against Germany. I think we helped them more than we should have. And then at the end of the war, basically half of Europe became communist, or we were left. Exactly. They were left to the communist. At the end of the war, we left half of the people to the communist.
Right. And initially we justified it by saying, oh, well, they are our allies in our war against Hitler. So, we're on the same side. But it became increasingly obvious that these are not good guys. I mean, it was already obvious if people were paying attention before the war. But, for example, there were a bunch of Russian refugees that tried to escape Russia. And it was the Allied troops that were under the command of Eisenhower that rounded up a lot of those refugees, put them on trains and send them back to Russia, where they were probably either killed or sent to the Gulag. And so there are a lot of things that we did to help the communists behind the scenes that were alarming. And it's no wonder that, Senator McCarthy and others began to sound the alarm. And initially they got a lot of traction. But then there were other groups, controlled opposition groups, that started poo-pooing on that investigation. And it became clear to us in the John Birch Society, if you read some of our books that we've published over the years, like None Dare Call It a Conspiracy, they were prophetic. 1972, we were pointing out that this was not about the communists. This was about a new world order. And the ultimate goal was to steal away national sovereignty to groups like the United Nations by using the communists as an excuse for us to band together with other international groups and lose our sovereignty.
But isn't that communism? Isn't that just communism on a bigger scale? I mean, global communism, that was the goal of the communist.
Right. If you study the nuances between, like, say, the National Socialists, the Nazis, and the communists, one of the main differences between them, they're obviously both totalitarian, they're both socialists, but one of the big differences that they have is the Nazis are national socialists. They believe in socialism within the confines of their nation, whereas the communists believe in global socialism. They've always believed in global socialism. So it all really fits hand in glove with their worldview. And you pair that with the central bankers, and we get the Federal Reserve in our country, and it all just works together. In fact, if you read the Communist Manifesto, you'll see, and we actually sell that book and to let people see, we've already adopted 3 of the proposed planks of the Communist Manifesto. One of them is the central bank, one of them is government schools, and one of them is a progressive income tax system. And so we've been moving in that direction for a while, and we really ought to have a wake-up call. These democratic socialists that we see in the Democratic Party that are running, I mean, the Democratic Party for a long time has been trying to move us slowly toward Marxism. These guys are just amping things up a little bit faster, but they're being very honest and open with what the Democrats have stood for quite some time.
Yeah. I think it was in the 1940 or 1944 election, a socialist candidate, Wendell Willkie, I believe was his name. And he didn't run. He'd been running for several years, several different elections. And somebody asked him, well, how come you're not going to run? And he said, well, don't need to. The Democrats have adopted most of our planks. So that was back in the 40s. Now, that's not to say that all the Democrats from the 40s on were communist, but they had adopted those planks, and it was just, working it in over there. Of course, we get FDR. I mean, a lot of what he put into the system was socialistic. I mean, we've had socialism in our country for a long time, unfortunately. So
yes, and one of the things you'll read too, if you read some of our books, you'll see the communists said many years ago that it was their goal to infiltrate both political parties. because then, they become like Emperor Palpatine from the Star Wars prequels, where, whether the clones win or whether the droids win, we win. We, the communists, win. We can play both sides against each other, and people have to choose with this false dichotomy that we're giving them. And you can see examples where even the Republican Party has been influenced by a lot of this type of thinking. Sadly.
Absolutely.
That's why we have to be vigilant and
Absolutely.
educated.
And that's why the standard should be the Constitution, not a party. Moving on to one of the main hot topics of the day, flock cameras. A lot of people, in my opinion, have a reasonable fear of the cameras, and they see it as a tool for a police state, communist or otherwise. So what is I think I know what the JVS position on flock cameras is, but go ahead and elaborate a little bit if you would.
Yeah, this issue has really exploded. It feels like just over the last few weeks. Obviously, there was already a growing concern with data centers, and we're hearing reports now that the majority of people in America are concerned about data centers, not just in the Democratic Party, but also in the Republican Party. And a lot of folks are concerned that, of course, these data centers are enabling the flock cameras. There's some unique concerns surrounding data centers that we could get into, but specifically, if we're talking about flock cameras, the big danger, of course, is surveillance, violation of our rights to privacy, which are protected by the Bill of Rights. The Fourth Amendment is one key example. The idea is you're not supposed to be searching people so thoroughly without a warrant or probable cause, and everybody is treated like a criminal before they've done anything harmful or obviously criminal. Then why are we being in a default state of investigation? It's really like 1984. Anybody that's read or heard about the book 1984, this is exactly what is depicted in that dystopian universe. Yeah. And the potential for how this could be abused is immense. Right now, our legal system may seem to be relatively benign, but you get the wrong people in control. You get these Democratic socialists, for example, to take over the White House and the Congress in a few years. And they changed the laws and then in place when COVID lockdowns were going on.
Yeah.
And people were being told you can't leave your home. You can't.
We're having a little technical issue there.
Can't go to church. Sorry. Yeah.
There's a slight delay there. Anyway, I don't know how. I think we had flock cameras to some degree during COVID, but just imagine if we had flock cameras to the degree we have now, or the degree that they wanted during COVID, we'd be just like China. And it reminds me too. You mentioned 1984. There was a movie or a series several years ago, Person of Interest. I think Jim Caviezel was the lead in that. But they had cameras everywhere. And yeah, okay, it can help find bad guys, and it can do certain things, but you can't give up all your freedom for security. You can't have them both right to that degree.
Yeah, absolutely. Big Brother is definitely watching, and we've heard reports on abuses where some police officers are trying to watch their girlfriend or their ex-wife. That's really the tip of the iceberg on how these things can be abused in the wrong hands. I was reading some statistics on the deflock.org website, and it says that there's 135,563 mapped flock cameras in the United States. Now, so far, 132 cities have rejected them, which is encouraging. We need to see a whole lot more rejected. And I put in a request to my congressman, Clay Fuller, here in Georgia, and asked him to look into it. He said he would, but I think what I've been told is that really it's the local sheriffs that have the final say on whether these flock cameras are allowed to stand. So if we can have local communities reaching out to our local sheriffs and say, hey, we don't want these here, we have an overwhelming response to that effect. And if they see that it's not just Democrats, but Republicans and people of all across the political spectrum that are promoting that, then hopefully we'll see many other communities reject them. I think here in Georgia, our county, Dade County in Trenton, they recently rejected some of the flock cameras that were positioned. So it can be done. and hopefully it becomes a more common thing that we see these things being gotten rid of.
So is it in Georgia that it's the sheriff's decision, or is that generally the case? And why is it the
Well,
sheriff's
I know
call? I would think the county, I understand the sheriff is the highest constitutional officer in most counties, but I would still think the county commission and county mayor or county supervisor, whatever you guys call it, would have some input on that.
yeah, it would make sense that they would. I know here in Georgia, I've been told that it is the sheriff's call. Maybe it could be different in Tennessee and other states, but I would check with your local sheriff and see if he has that jurisdiction, because my understanding is this is considered part of law enforcement. And a lot of these cameras are being used to check license plates specifically, to scan license plates as cars are driving by and to see if, somebody might be someone that they're on the lookout for. And so it sounds like it's under the sheriff's jurisdiction. It could be different in different places, though. I know in Georgia that's how it was.
Well, either way, I'm pretty sure even in Georgia that the legislature writes the laws for law enforcement, and my guess would be the legislature writes the standards for conduct and
Right.
and for the law enforcement. So it may be
Right.
something they've deferred to the sheriff on, but I
Right.
wonder if in the final analysis, if it is just their call. I would think something like that would need some sort of legal authorization from your state. I would think, but
Oh, sure. And even if it is the sheriff who's doing it, I'm sure the state legislature could intervene, and there are other parties that could intervene as well. But we need to get rid of these flock cameras. They are doing us no good. They're just bringing us closer to totalitarian statism, and the potentials of abuse are just awful.
yeah. So for those who support them and say, hey, we were able to find this missing person, we were able to find this kid before they were taken away, whatever. What's the response to them? What's the John Birch Society response to that?
How, if somebody the ends justifies the means, is that what they're using to say this?
I'm just asking if
that
I'm just saying
movie,
you guys I'm sure have
Minority
a
Report.
yeah, I'm just sure you guys have some sort of response, because that's one of the obvious questions. So is it that basically you don't believe in the ends justifies the means, which, by the way, for those of you who are not familiar with the ends justifies the means, that's what the communists always said. The ends justify the means.
Right. Right. Exactly. And, they always will make an excuse, whether it's something like this or whether it's an emergency. The statists are notorious for using emergencies to take away our rights. Whether it's the pandemic, where they had to keep people safe by making them lock themselves up in their houses and take the vaccines and put masks on, or whether it's a recession. Every time we've had a recession, they've used that to take away our rights. Every time we have a war, that's an excuse to take away our rights and to make government bigger and to inflate our currency, et cetera. So they'll always use these types of things as an excuse by saying the end justifies the means to make us more safe. And you're hitting on the nail on the head when you say it is about security versus freedom. You can be very secure as a slave in a plantation, or you can have freedom, and yes, it involves risk, but you learn to be more self-sufficient. You learn to depend on God, trust in the Lord rather than in government, which I'll choose God over government any day, because God is perfect and government is not. It's made of fallible, sinful people who can abuse authority. And like Lord Acton said, authority corrupts, and all authority corrupts absolutely. So, yeah.
Okay. Well, yeah, and I know that in Tennessee it's an issue. I know several people who are pushing back on this, and I hope more
It's
will.
a huge issue all over the country.
Yeah. And I'm glad to see that, especially after COVID, because we saw during COVID so many sheeple, and not only were some of them sheeple, but they were willing to not just, okay, I'm going to wear my mask and be a good little boy, but they wanted to point out anybody that wasn't wearing a mask, that wasn't 6 feet away, that was doing X, Y, or Z, that they took it upon themselves. Well, we got to report them. They're
Virtue
a
signaling.
danger. What's that?
Right. It's virtue signaling.
Yes. So I'm
And
glad
we're
to
just
see.
now seeing And we're just now seeing the extent to how wrong they were with the prosecutions of Dr. Fauci, right?
Yeah, well, and that's the thing too. I'm not convinced that that guy is going to see the time he needs. Well, let me rephrase this. His time should be very short. I'm not sure that it's going to be, because I
Yeah,
don't think I think if they were to convict him, I think that conviction should come with an execution, not a prison sentence. But I'm just not confident. It goes back to lack of trust in the government. So I'm not
absolutely.
confident that's going to happen. So
Yeah, there are a lot of people that died wrongfully because of those vaccines. I think about here in Georgia, we had Herman Cain, who was at one point a Republican
yeah,
nominee for president. He was a talk show host, conservative talk show host here in Georgia, and he was in his 70s and he died because of those vaccines. And there were countless other hundreds and thousands of people, especially older folks, that died because
yeah,
of those vaccines.
and died
They're
alone.
not
A
being.
lot of them died alone because at least here in Tennessee, people, your family couldn't come and see you in the hospital. I'd forgotten about Herman Cain dying. He actually, when he was running for
Mhm.
president, he came and spoke in Waverly, which is not far from here, and I went to go see him. And we had, you may be familiar, he was nationally syndicated here in Tennessee. We had Phil Valentine. He died of that as well.
Mhm.
So, or well, he died. I don't know if he died of COVID or if he died of the vaccine, but he died during that time frame. So,
Mhm.
anyway, I'm glad to see that a lot of people, I think at least some of the people that were sheep at that point in time realize now that they were sheep, and
Right.
hopefully they won't be sheep again. So,
Well, it's a great illustration as to the dangers of social engineering. People became more acquainted again with the expression gaslighting. We were all gaslit. There's an old movie that most people haven't seen from the 30s or 40s about a husband that gaslights his wife. It's funny how that term got resurrected from such an old film, but it's very much what we went through. It's kind of like one of those Mission Impossible movies where they, set up the scene, they capture some villain and they get him completely in an environment that they have control of and make him think that things are a certain way when they're not.
right.
That's what they were doing to us, the American people. And because that happened and it happened so blatantly, we at the John Birch Society have seen folks be far more willing to listen to what we've been calling out for years about how they have been trying to socially engineer and condition us to think in terms of totalitarianism and to cede up more of our rights to big government.
Yeah,
And folks are a lot more open to it than they used to be because they saw it firsthand in their own lives. Very
absolutely.
blatant.
Speaking of big government and John Birch Society, because one of the initiatives that you guys have that I really like, and I think it's really, really important, is Make America States Again, and that's what it says on this hat.
Great hat.
Yep, I like it. It's and Make America States Again. Let me hold it back up here so everybody can see it.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's a good hat, nice hat. I think that is the
absolutely.
only way to salvage the country, because it's getting back to true federalism. The
Exactly.
federal government
Exactly.
was created by the states. And
Right.
you hear the term compact theory. Now, it's not a compact theory, it's a compact fact. The states created the federal government. There are no federal officials that signed the Constitution. The people that signed the
Right.
Constitution were from the states. All the states
Right.
that created it. So that's a compact fact. And I'd like to take credit
Right.
for that, but that's Brian McClanahan. I know I talked to him. Hey guys, if you've never listened to Brian McClanahan, you need to listen to Brian McClanahan. And I saw a great one today with him and the constitutional scholar from the John Birch Society, Joe Wolverton. And the topic of it was Make America States Again. Okay. And he talked a lot about Federalist 46 that Madison wrote, laying out how the states were to react when the federal government inevitably overreaches. So let's talk a little bit about that program, that project of Make America States Again.
Yeah, so the best way to get a thorough view of that particular project of the John Birch Society is to go to our website, jbs.org/states, and you'll see a full explanation on that particular program. But essentially, like you said, this is about federalism. This is about the balance of power between the states and the federal government. We have seen way too much power being transitioned, brought to the federal government, and really now beyond the federal government to foreign entities, like we've said, the United Nations. There's a huge battle to move our country toward globalism. We, the United States, fund most of the United Nations, but we're only one vote out of 193 countries. And a lot of those countries are dictatorships. Some of them are communist dictatorships. Some of them are Islamic dictatorships. We only have one vote, but we're funding most of that nonsense.
Right. On our
so
soil.
We're obviously trying to Exactly. And so we're grateful for President Trump, pulling us back a little bit from some of that. Although he said some things like he wants to fix the UN, and we're like, no, we don't want to fix the UN. We don't want to replace the UN with another globalist entity. We want to restore things to the United States. And within our own country, we need to see a restoration of greater authority being vested in the states. And really, it's already vested if we're following our Constitution faithfully,
right,
then as the 10th Amendment says, all powers that are not explicitly given to the federal government are reserved to the states or to the people.
Right.
The 9th and the 10th Amendment are two of the Bill of Rights that are the most ignored. And the Supreme Court of the United States has, through faulty case law, said things, to effectively say that the Supreme Court, are the final arbiter of what the Constitution says.
Yep.
And so they've minimized the role that the states play as a check and balance in properly interpreting the Constitution and in properly following the law. But there's this wonderful doctrine called nullification that the John Birch Society talks about when we talk about Make America States Again. And you'll learn about it if you look at our website again at jbs.org/states. Some people refer to nullification as an antebellum, antiquated idea, but really it's essentially the reason why we had the War for Independence.
Absolutely.
It's the idea that it's the idea that an intermediate authority, civil government authority, can intervene against a tyrant like King George in the case of the 1776. There's a great book that we publish called this one right here, called The Doctrine of the Lesser Magistrate.
Yes.
Matthew Trowell is one of our speakers. You can have him come speak at your local community on this subject. But he's basically talking about how this is a legal concept that went back for centuries. It's why we had the Magna Carta before we had the Declaration of Independence. It's why, in the English Civil Wars, they fought against King Charles and ultimately had to behead him because he betrayed the people of England. He thought he was the highest authority. Right. And he actually committed treason against the people by violating a treaty that he had made with them and lying to them. And so Oliver Cromwell had to intervene as a lesser magistrate. There's so many examples in history, and this thing is very clearly the reason why we had the Declaration of Independence. And so you can't dismiss it as something that's just old and antiquated and out of touch. It's something that we may need to have our civil authorities step up again and fight for. We do have that authority vested in the 10th and 9th Amendment. So if our elected officials who take an oath to the Constitution, they don't take an oath to the Supreme Court, they don't take an oath to the president, they don't take an oath to the federal government, they take an oth to the Constitution. They are equally responsible for enforcing that Constitution as anyone else.
Well, and the state legislators are more responsible because they take an oath to both the U.S. and state constitution. So they are really where the rubber meets the road. Now, here in Tennessee, we have an organization I'm involved with and some other people across the state, Tennessee Citizens for State Sovereignty. And this organization was created a few years ago because we had nullification legislation that we were trying to get passed. Now, the funny thing is, this was like 2023. In late 2021, during COVID, our state legislature, they actually did pass a nullification resolution and sent it to the federal government. It had to do with forced vaccinations and certain other things related to COVID. And if you read it, and I know the guy who wrote it, I mean, it said that the sponsors were the Speaker of the House and the Lieutenant Governor. Well, I know that neither one of those guys actually know the Constitution, so I know who wrote it. It wasn't either one of them. Anyway, it was well written, and it referenced our history, and it used the term nullification. And it said, look, any power that was not delegated in the Constitution under Article 1, Section 8, that's where you get the federal powers, things that the states created, and those are the powers they gave to the federal government. And then Article 1, Section 9 are things that they couldn't do, and Article 1, Section 10 are the things the states couldn't do. Everything else is retained by the states. And so they made that point. And they even cited some Supreme Court cases to show that the states are still sovereign entities, and that the oath that they take, they have not only the right, but the responsibility to intervene on behalf of in behalf of the state when the federal government overreaches. And so they did this resolution. The governor didn't sign it, but it doesn't matter. We don't need our governor to sign it. Our legislature did it. And they made it clear, nullification, we're not just talking, we're going to go before the court and grovel like they do so often, but we will use legislative devices if we have to. And they sent this. So the following session, there was some legislation. It was not as strong as it should have been, and it didn't get anywhere. Well, the following year, when myself and actually there's a lady named Karen Bracken who headed this thing up, lives in Pennsylvania now, but she lived in East Tennessee at the time. And she's like, hey, let's see if the legislators are going to bring this nullification bill back, we need to do something to support it. And so we found out there it is, tncss.weebly.com. And we're still active, guys. Karen's moved on. She still sends out the newsletter. I'll have to take that over eventually. She's much more of a prolific writer than I am. Great lady, does great work. But that website is still active. We still have an organization in Tennessee, and we're still going to push for nullification, provided we can find legislators to, put forth the legislation. And that's the way our republic was intended to work. That, okay, if it was expected. That's what Federalist 46 lays out. It lays out the expectation that the states will do X, Y, and Z, and to include in Federalist 46, it talked about having a state militia, worst case scenario, that nothing else, you would, use that to defend the state. But we would not be 46 or 40 trillion in debt. We would not have all of this garbage that goes on in our country if past generations had actually followed the Constitution and actually stood up for it. We have very few people that understand our Constitution, regardless whether they're in office or not. And many of them who say they support it, they support a perverted version of it, a court-perverted version of it.
Absolutely. That is spot on. And, it is interesting. If you study case law, when I was in law school, we did a lot of study of case law and how the Constitution has been replaced by judicial opinion. There are a few times where the Supreme Court has said, yes, this is the legitimate jurisdiction of the states. The federal government cannot mandate certain things in these instances. But even in those instances, the federal government will get around it by bribing the states through grant dollars, for example. Yeah. And we see things like that happening with a lot of how bad education policy has entered into the government school system. I think even with the flock cameras, I've been told that there are some, funds that are coming to these local communities to incentivize them to adopt these flock cameras, like we were talking about earlier. Yeah. But what they don't mandate, they bribe the states into. And so the local communities have to have the fortitude to say no to taking those dollars. And that's often a very hard temptation for them not to give into. But it requires the local community to be engaged and to be communicating with your local, commissioners, your state legislators, and putting some steel in their spine on this kind of subject.
And it's local, but it's also at the state level, because I hear the argument at the state level. Well, if we don't take this money from the federal government for education, then, it's still our people pay tax dollars, and that money is going to go to some other state. Will get more money, and we won't get anything, even though our people pay taxes as well. And I understand that, but at the same time, you got to look what you're giving up. Okay, you may not get the dollars, but you're giving up your sovereignty, you're giving up your freedom, you're giving up your ability for your state. And especially when it comes to education, I would say that if we hadn't had top-down education in our state and so many other states willingly taking this money with all of the ropes attached and all the curriculum attached and all this other mandated garbage attached, then we probably wouldn't have all these communists running for office. Because where did they learn it? I mean, hey, Tennessee's had a Republican supermajority for the last 16 years. I would think if we had serious conservatives, constitutionally-minded Republicans in office for 16 years, that we could have had an impact on the education system by now. And we wouldn't be turning out little commies like we are.
No, absolutely not. And, it's really funny how people will like to say, well, this new batch of Democrats are so much more radical than, say, the Joe Biden generation. But really, it's the Joe Biden generation that created the Mondani generation through the policies they promoted, through the education system, just cooking them in this incubator for socialism, Marxism, et cetera. And we let them do that by letting them run the government schools the way they have over the last several generations. 1964, the early 1960s, they got rid of prayer, they got rid of the Bible, and then they started introducing sex ed and a lot of Marxist ideologies, and the impact was immediately seen with the sex ed programs. You saw the sudden jump in the children out of wedlock, STDs and stuff in the 70s. We have a great book on that subject here called the Sikas Circle that your folks can read. And this really goes into depth in describing the designed effect on the government school system and on the education of the youth, to demoralize them, to make them weaker. Because, if you think about this, for example, if you destroy the nuclear family and suddenly you have all these girls that have children out of wedlock, they're going to be so much more vulnerable to accept the bribes from the welfare state. They're going to need those dollars, right? But if they have a husband that's supporting them, they're going to be a lot more protected against those types of losses of liberty in exchange for funds. And so it all fits together. People try to pit social conservatives against fiscal conservatives, but the truth is it all, is a part of the same equation. And if you destroy people morally, then they are going to become more easily prey for the status and the welfare state.
Yeah. And much of that came down through the Supreme Court, which is the federal government.
Yeah.
And of course, it was supported by the Congress. Initially, when something would come down, you'll hear your congressman say, well, I don't like it. I think it's wrong. And hopefully the next presidential election, we can appoint, the next Republican president will appoint some more conservative judges, and we can fix, which basically just reinforces the wrong idea, that our founders created a top-down system where everything was going to be decided by a simple 5-4 majority Supreme Court opinion. And,
right.
But that is still invading the state sovereignty, because all those issues are state issues. Every one of those things are state issues.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Supreme Court justices have improved under President Trump. They've reversed some of the bad case law that we've seen in the last couple of generations, but still there's so much more that needs to be corrected. And just the idea that the Supreme Court is the final arbiter of interpreting the Constitution is a false idea. Everyone who takes an oath to the Constitution has at some level a responsibility to interpret the Constitution, to enforce it. And so we do need local officials that take an oath to the Constitution, state legislative, governors, et cetera, to be willing to stand back against the encroachment on our liberties through the principle of nullification. That's what our founding fathers in 1776 did. Yeah. And what a great legacy to stand in their shoulders and continue to promote that.
Yeah.
Really.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Our founding fathers grew up in a Christian time when Christian worldview was prominent in America. Most people were Trinitarians. Trinitarian worldview is something that allows for harmony between the one and the many, the individual and the community. And a lot of the history of humanity has been a pendulum swing from, one excess to the other, from the excesses of totalitarianism, often seen through monarchy in the past, more recently seen through communism and Nazism and other things of that sort, to anarchy like we saw in the French Revolution and some of the other revolutions. We've just swung back and forth between these two extremes, extreme individualism, extreme totalitarianism. And the wonderful thing about a Republican form of government is it tries to bring harmony to the interests of the individual and the interests of the community.
Right.
And it does that through checks and balances. It makes sure that the 41%, unlike in a democracy, you know, where the 51% can vote to take away all the rights of the 49%,
Right.
it has protections against that type of excess. It's not just the tyranny of the king or the individual, you know, it's the tyranny of the mob that it protects you from as well. And one of those checks and balances is the check between the states and their sovereignty and the federal government.
Yep.
You know, another thing we gave up back in the 17th Amendment when it was passed was we gave away a wonderful check by allowing the states to elect our U.S. senators. Here in Georgia, where I'm from, you know, if we still had that in place, then we wouldn't have 2 Democrat U.S. senators, John Ossoff, who we're trying to get rid of, would not have been elected. The state legislature is Republican, but somehow we have a U.S. senator who's a Democrat, and one of the worst Democrats. You know, he's worse than Bernie Sanders. If you look at the Freedom Index, he's a total Marxist. He poses as if he's a moderate, but in reality, if you look at his voting record, he's a complete Marxist, globalist. But yeah, this is one of the protections against that kind of a problem, those checks and balances. And that's just one example. We got to get back to a Republican system of government that shields us from those types of excesses. We still have the Electoral College. That's still in place.
Right.
Thankfully, let's hopefully keep
Well,
that
they're trying to do away with that. I mean, they're doing all they can to end that as well. But, you know, think about all the divisive issues over the last 60 years. You know, first they took prayer out of school, then you got abortion, then the court decides that gay marriage is the law, and many other things that they've done. All those things were state issues. All those things by rights were decisions for the states to make. And when the court does it and forces it on everybody, number one, it's the exact opposite of what the founders intended. It's the exact opposite. You know, the whole reason we have a Bill of Rights was because the people at the time were concerned they were making the Constitution without a Bill of Rights would make the federal government too powerful. So they got them to agree, hey, we'll pass the Constitution, but in the first Congress, you've got to add a Bill of Rights. And they did. And it was to limit the federal government, not the state government. But decades after the 14th was passed, they perverted that idea. The court perverted it, and the public accepted it. Now, I say the public accepted it. There were complaints at the time throughout from the 20s on when they really started their whole incorporation garbage. And it's all court created. None of it has a constitutional basis. It's all a perversion of the court. People did make complaints at the time. Nobody really pays attention to what was said at the time, but they just say, well, okay, that's our system. People have accepted a fraud. We've accepted a fraud. The 14th is fraudulent, especially the way the courts have used it against us.
Oh, yeah. And you can see that in the recent debate about illegal immigration, and that somehow they're trying to construe the 14th Amendment as protecting illegal aliens from being deported. I don't understand some of our more conservative justices who have been sympathetic to that point of view. Obviously, they weren't thinking about illegal immigrants at the time that was written. There's all kinds of problems with how they've been misconstruing things with the 14th Amendment. It's clear that the particular things that are meant to be incorporated, I think Judge Bork said it pretty well when he said, you know, it's clear that the word that follows due is process.
Right.
It's the procedural rules that are meant to be incorporated, not the substantive laws and substantive rights that are incorporated. And so they really have strayed away from sound jurisprudence and how they've applied the 14th Amendment in so many ways that we could spend an hour just talking about that.
Oh yeah, and I've had discussion on the show several times, and we'll probably hit it on it somewhat with my guest next week, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But no, I'm glad that the John Birch Society has that project, and I know you've only been on there since April. But how? Can you tell what kind of traction it's getting across the states? Have you seen?
Yeah, well, we have chapters. We have chapters all over the country. We have chapters all across, Georgia and Tennessee, and we're looking to grow more chapters. So if somebody in your audience would like to be a part of a John Birch Society chapter, we have a chapter in Cumberland County. We're getting ready to open up another one near Cookeville. And we have John Birch Society members all over the state, but we want to help them build their community and help to educate more citizens in Tennessee through local chapters. So if you want to reach out, go to jbs.org. You can become a member by signing up. You also get a subscription to our magazine, The New American. If you become a member, it's $87 for an individual. It's $99 for a couple. And you get plugged in with your local community and have chapter meetings and educate. Because like you said earlier, education is where it all starts. A lot of folks have been brainwashed. They've been taught the wrong thing. It's like Reagan joked back in 1964 that the problem with our liberal friends is not that they are ignorant, it's that they know so much that isn't so.
Right.
And that's very much the case when it comes to the Constitution. The federal government, the Constitution is not what the Supreme Court says it is. It is what the text says it is.
Right.
So we got to get back to the text.
In order to do that, true federalism is making America states again. I just want to emphasize that. I think more people need to realize that it's, as we said at the beginning, it's not a compact theory, it's a compact fact. And we're not going to solve our debt issues, we're not going to solve so many of the problems that we have until we address that, and until we say, you know what, we've got to go back and read it and follow it as intended. And I just see that as the only way that we stay together long term as a country, in my opinion.
Now, you're right. For most of the first half of our founding time, we referred to the states in the plural. We said these United States. Yeah. Nowadays, people refer to it in the singular, and that's just an example of the mindset that has shifted. But we need to think of ourselves as these United States once again. It's a group of 50 states that each have sovereignty in and of themselves. They've given up a certain amount of sovereignty to the federal government, very limited, as the 10th Amendment, the 9th Amendment specify.
Right.
Our founding fathers realized that the states had too much power and the central government had not enough power before the Constitutional Convention of 1789. That's why we moved away from the Articles of Confederation to what we have today.
Right.
But we have definitely pendulum swinged way beyond what they envisioned. We've got to get back to the Constitution where there's that balance between the federal and the state, and they're checking each other.
Absolutely. Any closing thoughts?
Well, thank you so much again for having me on your program. I appreciate, again, all that you're doing to help patriots and conservatives and constitutionalists be able to be more effective. Education is obviously one key place to start, learning about what the Constitution actually says, learning about what our founding fathers originally taught, and also being aware of the enemy. That's one of the big things the John Birch Society is doing, is we're educating people about who we are. That's what Sun Tzu said. You got to know the two things you got to do to be successful. Sun Tzu said is know yourself and know your enemy. If you don't know yourself and your enemy, you're going to fail. And so the John Birch Society, learn about us at jbs.org. We're helping people know themselves, know our history, and also know the enemy and the conspiracy that they're foisting upon us. So thank you so much for your time.
So if somebody wanted to have you come speak in Tennessee to help get a chapter started, they just go to the John Birch Society website and send an email or what?
Yeah, you can reach me at ndarnell@jbs.org. If you go to our website, there's a place where you can look up the coordinator for your zip code area, and it'll point you to me. And then I can come out. I've been out to speak. I was recently in Wilson County speaking before the Wilson County GOP. I've spoken to several different groups in Tennessee. I'd be happy to come out and get to meet with some like-minded patriots anywhere in Tennessee.
All right. Any upcoming events in Tennessee?
We have an interview with another local conservative talk show host that we're going to be meeting with in Nashville on the 2nd. We're going to be doing a tour of the Nashville State Capitol on the 3rd. We're going to be opening up a new chapter in Cookeville near the end of the month. Okay. So a lot of things going on in Tennessee we're excited about.
Who's the guy you're going to do the interview with on the 2nd? Do you remember the name?
I don't remember the name off the top of my head right now.
Okay. All right. And your website again, it's jbs.org.
jbs.org. Again, if you want to learn about how to make the America states again, go to jbs.org/states. You can go to our website, become a member by clicking the button that says join, and you can look up, how to find your local coordinator by typing in the zip code, and it'll take you to me if you live in Tennessee, or it'll take you to another coordinator if you live in a different state.
Well, hey, thanks again for coming on, and thanks for what you do.
Thank you very much for all that you do. God bless you, and please keep on fighting the good fight.
Well, you too. Take care. Have a great night.
Thank you.
I want to thank the audience for taking the time to watch our program tonight. Check out our audio podcast on iHeartRadio, Spotify, and other platforms as well. Sign up for our weekly newsletter at our website, teeninformer.com. Find and follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Got a quick announcement for you. The TFA, Tennessee Firearms Association, will hold its annual fundraiser on September 12th at the Farm Bureau Building at the Wilson County Fairgrounds in Lebanon, Tennessee. The MC will be Dr. Ken Berry, and the keynote speaker is Laura Logan. Registration begins around 9 a.m. Vendor tables and social time follow that. You're going to have Wits will provide the barbecue lunch, and then speakers and announcements begin at around noon. There will also be a silent auction that will run during the event, and live auctions follow the speaker program. To purchase tickets, go to tfalac.org/events, and that's on, you can look. We've actually posted that on our website, so you can look it up there. And that's for the 2026 annual event. Yeah, look at that on our Facebook page. And that's a great. If you've never been to these events, they're great. Good turnout. You're going to have conservatives from all over the state, and TFA is the only no compromise gun rights organization in Tennessee. Be sure to join us next week when our guest will be William Watkins Jr., author of The Independent Guide to the Constitution, and it is Original Intentions, Modern Inventions. Okay, so this is a great book for anybody who cares about the Constitution. It's a great book if you've got a kid who's going to go to law school, because he's just going to learn garbage there. If you want him to have a constitutional reference, this is the book you want to get, him or her. And also, homeschoolers. This is a great book for homeschoolers. Now, next week, we're going to focus on the First Amendment and how it's been distorted. Mr. Watkins, in addition to being an author, is a constitutional scholar, and he has served as both a prosecutor and defense attorney. He's also a current fellow at the Independent Institute. Please take the time to check out our other shows brought to you by West Tennessee TV by going to myparistv.com. You can find links to the Mike Weatherford Show and Sportscast with Jeremy Bucklew. Tomorrow, Mike welcomes in Stacy Freeman from Bethel Global Studies and how that organization is helping students prepare for life and be better global citizens. We'll have to talk about it. Next Sunday, Jeremy welcomes Inman football head coach Barry Barker to talk about their upcoming season. That's it for now. Good night from Paris, Tennessee, that is.